Okay, now why should a lender take less?
Well, the lender doesn't want the property back. That's the biggest mantra. They don't want the properties back. They got enough of them, and they lose a lot of money. If you just think a second, if you want to think it, they let the person be 4 months behind, then you got a 4-month foreclosure period. Then if you have to go through an eviction period, then you have to go through a fix-up period, then you have to go through a listing period and another closing period. That could run 14 to 16 months.
Right. So I understand those loss mitigators have a worksheet, and it gets down to one. If we take the short sale now, this is our net proceeds, or if we go down that route of months down the road, this will probably be our net.
Yes.
And if it's $50 more,
they'll balance. They'll balance it all out. And they have a responsibility to their stockholders and everything else. But one of the things a lot of people don't know is that the lender starts taking too much property back. Any property they take back, their reserves to lend are limited. And so therefore they don't want it on their balance sheet because the real estate owned affects their ability to lend.
Okay. What about the costs involved? You might have a mechanics lien, property tax liens, an IRS lien.
Well, if there's an IRS lien, forget the short sale. The time frame with an IRS to wipe that lien off is too long. If there's an IRS lien up against the property, go to another property.
Okay.
And the mechanics liens, if there's a mechanics lien, that has to be negotiated also. So if there's mechanics liens against the property and back taxes and a second, makes it very difficult. Now, if the first and second are with the same lender, that's a little bit different.
Okay. Now, in terms of the ideas for the brokers, they better educate themselves on how this process works.
It's extremely difficult to know all about it. It's just complicated.
Right.
Now, what happens, the biggest problem that has happened is that the time frame problems and how to prepare a proper package to give to the lenders. The package is extremely important. It has to be very complete so there's not a lot of communication back and forth.
Okay. Now, in terms of the what about the credit report? The buyer fills out a type of credit report, or not the buyer, but the occupant.
Yeah, the owner has to really, it's a little bit different on a short sale because the lender is not only going to be required that the buyer has adequate credit, they will check out the credit of the seller. They will ask them where the seller might have gotten, the owner, we'll call it the owner, where the owner might have prior had got the loan with no statements, no loan doc, stated income. They're going to want to see. They're going to want to see W-2s and everything else, and it's got to be very complete. And if they have some IRAs or other assets, it's very hard then to get a short sale because the lender will want them to help some of the problems.
Right, exactly. So if sometimes the values have gone down, but the people can afford to make the payments.
Correct.
And they have cars and they have IRAs and CDs, the lender's not going to look too kindly on a short sale in a situation like that.
Correct. If a person has too many assets, it's hard. I saw a statistic in the California paper this week, and the people who bought houses in 2006 and 2007, a lot of those are underwater. People who bought the properties in 2003, 2004, a very small percentage of those are underwater, and the reason for that is people refinanced them to the peak.
Got it. Okay. Now, in terms of the lenders, you mentioned some are stubborn.
Yes,
your
very
class.
stubborn. Some just are slow. They're slow and stubborn.
To respond.
Yes, and so we mentioned earlier in the class, the number one rule about short sales, there are no rules, and another rule is every lender is different, and almost everyone has a different application that you got to use.
Sure. Now, on that note, with the application for the lender, so the seller wants to do a short sale, they fill out an application for the lender, and there's a cover letter that should be 1 page and explain how you got into this situation.
No, excuse me, interrupting, but that's the hardship letter.
The hardship letter.
The cover letter is simply saying, here it is, we're presenting our package. But every lender, it must be a federal law, every lender will insist on a hardship letter. And the hardship letter doesn't have to be long, but it should state how I got into this trouble.
Right.
What tragedy or what happened, or I lost my job, or I went on a different pay schedule. I was in the television industry and working in Hollywood, and I'm done. And so they explain where the hardship letter. Then they want comparable market data, the lender does, and then they want anything other information, photos, maybe a recent appraisal, everything.
Right. So they have broker price opinions from different realtors
Correct.
in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Their credit reports.
Yep.
If they're self-employed, last 2 years tax returns.
Last 2 years tax returns on almost everybody nowadays. They
Yeah.
check out the sellers closer than they did buyers in the past.
I see. So regardless if you're self-employed, they might ask for
They'll
your tax
check on
return.
everything.
Well, can you speak about that? What in terms of the forgiveness of debt? Because in the past, and I know in the recession of the early 90s, S&L crisis and whatnot, people would get dinged with a mortgage debt relief.
Correct.
Can you explain what that is?
What it is when the lenders, by law, when there is a forgiveness of debt, it's called forgiveness of debt, they have to send a 1099 to the owner. And the 1099 says this much debt was forgiven. That is called forgiveness of debt. It's taxed as ordinary income. And so therefore there's a problem. And so therefore they were having many people were having to declare it as income even though they're losing their house. And particularly for people who refinance, that could be a big problem. So what happened, it became such a problem that there was a law passed in late December to forgive debt for these 3 years. For the year 2007, 2008, and 2009, the federal government passed a law that said there will be forgiveness of debt on 1 to 4 units on any debt that was used to purchase the property. And there's also another way around the forgiveness of debt. If it's a no recourse loan, meaning it was a loan used to buy a home, that's non-recourse debt, that also doesn't have to report a 1099. Okay. And then there's another section called insolvency, and if they can show that they're insolvent, there's a IRS code section 108 that says if you can prove you're insolvent, you don't have to pay the 1099 income. So there are some ways around the ordinary income.
Okay. Now, in terms of if the buyer is an investor, I know there's been some changes there that a realtor, a licensee can represent an investor now.
What happened is there's a law that we mentioned, 1695, that was done to protect owners. Right. But one of the parts of the law, when an agent was working with an investor, it was really draconian. I mean, it was really hard. What they said was that if you're a real estate agent working with an investor showing a 1 to 4 unit that's got a notice of default against it, number one, you have to show them your real estate license, their written proof, but number two, you must show a bond for twice the value of the property. Those bonds can't be purchased anywhere, so any real estate agent working with an investor was violating the law. So 3 years ago, CAR came up with some forms and said, what you're going to do now, real estate agents, is you're going to say that you're not representing them. You're just going to be a referral licensee, and therefore you're not representing them, and you won't fall under that law. But it had so much in your discuss risk management. Right. It's very big chance for liability on those type of things. Well, what happened is a case, Schweitzer versus Westminster Investments, an appellate court ruled that that bond requirement was too vague to be enforced. Mm-hmm. And so they appealed it to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court the state Supreme Court denied a hearing. So as of the end of March, it's the opinion of CAR and everybody else that a requirement of the bond is no longer needed, and so therefore now real estate agents can start showing property to investors. They still have to follow all the other rules. Right. They have to follow the 5-day cancellation and the cooling off period and the 10-point type contract.
Okay. Now that said, so in terms of the short sale, if the home is not sold and the buyers are not making payments, then we're going to go into the foreclosure process.
Correct.
Okay, so the people watching this are probably concerned about that as well.
Correct.
So let's touch on that.